In one of Jesus's most famous parables, it actually challenges our default settings as humans and offers us a vision of God's new humanity. And that's the parable of the Good Samaritan that we find in Luke chapter 10. Jesus is gathered there with his disciples and he's teaching to a crowd. And in the midst of teaching, a lawyer stands up and wants to test Jesus. He's like pushing Jesus's boundaries. And he says to Jesus, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Big question. And Jesus looks at the lawyer and says, "Well, what's written in the law? What do you read there?" And he just turns the question back on him. And this lawyer says, "Well, you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And Jesus is like, "Bravo, good job. You've given the right answer. Do this and you will live." But this lawyer, he's not a lawyer of like we think of it now. He's actually a lawyer of the Torah, of the first 5 books of the Bible, which we call the Pentateuch, this Old Testament. So he's a lawyer of the highest moral code of the time. And he has faithfully studied this. So now he is going to push Jesus just a little farther to see if he's the real deal. And he questions Jesus. He says, "So what is this eternal life thing?" Jesus reverts the question and says, "What do you think?" And he gives him an answer from Deuteronomy chapter 6. And when Jesus is like, "Great answer. Those are the 2 things we do. We love God and we love people." But then the lawyer, just like my teenage son, has to push it even further. The lawyer looks at Jesus and says, "Okay, well then who is my neighbor?" I mean, loving God is easy, right? Loving other people, I'm not so sure. And so then Jesus wants to see if the lawyer is really paying attention. So he leans into this story. He says, "Well, man was going from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes and they went away, leaving him half dead." Now, this first part, Jesus sets the scene for the lawyer as well as for us. This road is from Jerusalem to Jericho. This road was actually called back in the day the Bloody Pass. Doesn't that sound like a road that all of us want to go down? This area known for danger. It had these high cliffs, and so people would get mugged and killed there all the time. It's this descending sort of canyon. And so it would give people who were up to no good just the perfect place to hide and their vantage point to attack. So you can see that as Jesus is giving this very specific description, the people around him and this lawyer, they can visualize it. Now, Jesus continues. He said, "Well, a priest is going down the same road. And when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place where the man was, he passed by on the other side." Now, this is scandalous as well, because we would expect that these holy people would do the work that they were called to do. I mean, they're like the first responders, and they didn't actually respond. But then Jesus pushes it even farther. Jesus then says, "But then a Samaritan." Now, Samaritans and Jews hate each other, so this is part of the context of that story. A Samaritan, as he traveled, came to where the man was, and when he saw him, he had compassion on him. And he sat and he bandaged him and put on his wounds. He poured on oil and wine. Now, this word compassion, it's actually from, if we break it up into English, it's come, which means with, and passion, which means suffering. So it's to suffer with. So if we have compassion for someone, we're willing to suffer with. Even more than that, in the original Greek, it's this really fun word to say. Splachnidzomai. Isn't that fun? Splachnidzomai, which actually means to have so much compassion that your insides are poured out, that your guts are poured out. It's the kind of compassion that you have to be moved to act on behalf of another. The Samaritan, the least likely person, was the one who was poured out of himself, moved beyond the visceral reaction in order to help and care for this man. It meant that he moved out of his own self-interest, out of his own self-service, out of his own self-centerism, out of his own egocentrism in order to take action. And so he pours on oil and wine and bandages him up. Now, oil and wine, that's like the Neosporin and hydrogen peroxide of the day. So he's just sort of cleaning those wounds and he's putting them on that. He is the least likely of all of these to be able to stop. So what Jesus is pushing here, when we ask the question, who's our neighbor? It's a person from a different background, a different faith, a different political party, a different ideology, an outsider, a person. That's the one who has compassion. Dr. Martin Luther King calls this a kind of dangerous unselfishness in one of his last sermons when he preached about the Good Samaritan. Dr. King said this. He says, "The first question that the priest and the Levite asked was, 'If I stop to help the man, what will happen to me?' He said, but the Good Samaritan reversed the question and said, if I do not stop to help the man, what is going to happen to him? Friends, here's my question for you. How can we live with a kind of dangerous unselfishness? And here's my second one. What kind of person would be the least likely person that you would want to stop and help? What does that person look like? How do they vote? What religion are they? Think about that a little bit when you think about the story